Making your way through an endless stream. Silence cuts reality by the seams. Only for a moment, moments always seem to fade away. Searching for the picture, always out of reach. Holding on to freedoms that yours to keep. Oh, only for a moment, moments always seem to
Hello, everyone. This is Greg Staley of Diverge Media, and thank you for joining us tonight. Our next guest is the PPC candidate for Brantford-Brant, Mr. Cole Squire. We're having him on to discuss 5 different topics, one of them being his choosing, which is critical race theory. The other 4 we have, you'll see at the bottom now as we come in, is going to be debt, taxes, lockdown, and environment. The way this works is that every time we reach out to a candidate, we reach out to all the candidates in that riding that already have a nominee. We have done so with the Conservative Party of Canada, with the NDP, and with the Green. They have all been offered the same opportunity to debate the 4 topics I've chosen, as well as one for them. So far, Mr. Squire is the only one to take up the offer. So we appreciate him coming on to have a frank conversation about politics. Let's welcome him in, Mr. Squire. How are you?
Thanks for having me on this evening.
No problem. Thank you for coming on. As I said, I've reached out to everyone else, and you're the only taker so far, but that just tells me that you're willing to have a debate about your ideas and what your passion is.
A safe zone for me here, so.
Well, don't get too comfortable yet, eh? So we start out. Sorry, go ahead.
Only pre-approved interview questions. I don't want nothing damaging my campaign now.
Yeah, no, you made that joke earlier and I laughed, but no, you said whatever is on the table. Don't worry about it. And I appreciate that because that is something that, quite frankly, is missing from politics today. So we're going to start it off. We're going to have a couple of articles as prompts here and kind of go through it. And I'll just try to basically introduce the topic and then we'll talk about it a little bit. But where's my debt? I'm looking for the debt. Okay, here we go. So bringing in the debt, here we are. Canadians deserve better. This is the Financial Post that wrote this. Canadians deserve better than 5 decades of deficits. It's time for politicians to take deficits seriously and tighten their belts like the rest of us. So, quoting out of the article here, a baby born this year owes more than $26,000 in federal government debt. By the time the budget is balanced a half century from now, newborns will be on the hook for about $67,000. I was saying to you before we went live here, this was the part that's scary to me. Not to mention the interest charges that will eat away at $3.8 trillion worth of taxpayers' money by 2070. Starting in 2043, interest charges will exceed the government's budget deficits. So I'm just going to let you expand on this, what this means to you, and then from a PPC perspective, kind of the platform and policy approach.
When I first stumbled across this article the last couple of days, actually today it was posted, I believe. it just seeing the federal deficit in dollar terms is extremely alarming. The PBO, Parliamentary Budget Office, is now projecting that we're going to be at the upwards of $3.8 trillion. And this is just another example of Trudeau and the political establishment in Ottawa's failed fiscal policies that continue to indebt Canadians. And as you mentioned now, a newborn being born this year is already in debt at $26,000. And by the projections listed here, by 2070, a newborn child will already be facing $67,000 in debt. So from an economic standpoint, this is totally unsustainable. We are living way out of our own means, and we are now living even outside of generations' means that aren't even born here. So from Trudeau's relaxadaisy approach to the budget balancing itself, I think it's becoming quite clear to Canadians that that is not the case, especially when we're having all types of wasteful spending. We're having exacerbated amounts of corporate welfare. We're sending billions of dollars overseas to foreign development aid, while we continue to lock down our small businesses and keep people at home and throwing money at issues that aren't taking precedence over some more salient issues within our society today. So we're on a very downward spiral, and it's time that we have adults back in Ottawa who can start to steer this ship right. And we need to start living within our means.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's expand that a little bit more. So obviously one of the best ways, there's a couple different ways you can deal with debt. So you can raise taxes or you can raise revenue. And in the case of small business, the other thing that comes to mind is pipelines. Those are two ways. I mean, just open. That's first off. We'll talk about lockdowns later, but you're hurting businesses by these restrictions. Let's get the revenue back to normal. But also, what is the perspective of the PPC from a revenue standpoint on pipelines? Because I know that is part of your platform. So can you just explain how that would tie into revenue? And that's kind of tied into the debt, obviously.
Our oil and gas sector, it's one of our most lucrative industries here in Canada. And with these radicals we see in Ottawa, they continue to hamper down on our energy sector. They're raising regulations, they're raising taxes, and they're making it nearly impossible for investment projects in this industry. There's a lot of propaganda that's being pumped into this sector too as well. So one of the things the PPC would be doing would be to remove some of the really ridiculous bills that have really squandered our energy sector. They made it nearly impossible, as I said, for energy development, whether it's putting pipelines through. And some of the bills that's been passed by our current government, like they're restricting oil tanker traffic on the West Coast, but they're continuing to allow the United States and other countries to put their oil traffic through. So it absolutely makes no sense for Canada to be left out, especially within the coast of our own territory here. And yeah, like I said, there's a lot of propaganda that's being pumped into this too by people like the Greenpeace activists or whatnot. We see foreign foundations like the Tides Foundation, which is financially backed by some pretty corrupt people like George Soros. We see the Rockefeller Foundation too playing a part in this. So these are outside entities from Canada that are pushing this propaganda into our institutions. They're filling our students with irrational climate fear, hysteria, stuff like that. And as I said, the end result of that is that we're pushing for this fantasy of having green energy completely replace our oil and gas sector, and that's just not feasible at all. It's not feasible from a financial perspective or even realistically to meet the supply needs we have in Canada. So the PPC would definitely repeal a lot of this legislation right now that's really preventing our oil and gas sector from being able to expand and operate from their perspective.
Okay, so on the one thing I think that might have been missed is that I believe it's Maxime has said before that he would use the Constitution to get pipelines built from tide to tide, basically from like coast to coast. And I guess my perspective of that is I'd rather have it done that way than shipped by rail. And also, just because we don't produce oil here, I think the argument I would make, or perhaps you can have your own opinion on this, was that even if we're not producing the oil here and shipping it here, it's going to come from somewhere. Demand's not just going to go away. And so wouldn't it be better if we did it here where we do it very ethically and we have stringent environmental standards as compared to other places around the world, or maybe that's not a straight comparison. It's not even close to the standards that they uphold.
Absolutely. Our energy workers in Canada abide by some of the strictest environmental standards and policies, as you kind of touched on there. We produce some of the cleanest energy using our natural resources here in Canada. So it really makes no sense to be outcasting our own economic infrastructure in Canada. As you mentioned, Maxime's not afraid to use the Constitution to get these critical infrastructure projects done, such as building pipelines. So we'll be utilizing the Constitution to make sure that we are able to push these very important projects through by, like I said, using the Constitution, which would section 91.2 within it. I'm not 100% correct on that, but that allows us to assert federal jurisdiction over projects that have national interest for Canadians. So the current establishment, they don't want to use the Constitution. They don't want to have those conversations to get these projects done. And like you said, the demand's still going to be there. We can hate on pipelines all we want, but the reality is there's a whole network of them underneath North American soil already. And while there are some accidents that can happen with them, when you're looking at the alternative, which is transporting this oil and gas or oil around through railroad traffic, the risk for spills or anything like that exponentially increases. So pipelines are the most efficient way to ship this product around. It lowers costs down and it creates really important jobs for Canadians that are people in our country.
All right. I think that's a good one to shift into topic 2 here. Taxes, obviously oil, what comes to mind? Carbon taxes. So let's go into the next article here. Aaron O'Toole, opinion, O'Toole's carbon taxes would come with big cost for families. So Aaron O'Toole's proposed carbon taxes would cost you more to heat your home, put food on the table, and drive to work. The leader of the Conservative Party of Canada broke his promise, announced that if elected Prime Minister, he's going to impose his own carbon tax at $50 per ton on gasoline, diesel, and natural gas. He's also planning a second carbon tax. I apologize. You can hear that in the background. I cannot win lately, but I don't even know where she is. She's downstairs. That's how loud the cats are. Anyways, I apologize. So, carbon tax. Aaron O'Toole has come out and said $50 a ton he would do his own on diesel and natural gas, and he's also planning a second carbon tax. So we'll let you take away from there and your thoughts.
Both the Liberals and Conservatives are continuing to really, I know it's hysterical. They're essentially wanting to tax the air we breathe. Carbon is the essential element for basic human life on Earth. And they're using this as a tax scheme to control of natural phenomena, like whether it be the climate or day-to-day weather. It's just this came in to be considered mainstream science is beyond me. Like I said, both the parties have no plan to scrap the carbon tax. Aaron O'Toole originally signed a pledge to scrap the carbon tax if they were to come into office, and that's just not the case anymore. As you said, now he's talking about not only keeping the carbon tax, adding a second carbon tax. And from the results we've seen already from the Liberal government, the basic costs of living have exponentially increased. Groceries are costing more because it's costing more fuel to be able to ship those around our country. People are paying more at the pumps when they're trying to fuel their vehicles to get to work. And the cost of heating your homes is going up as well. And these items are affecting Canadians who are already scraping by and working just to make ends meet. So this is helping the lower to middle classes when it's absolutely not. 40% of Ontario households are paying more in carbon taxes than they're getting in rebates. That was another lie put out by Trudeau's government. That's just not the case from what we've seen. And if Trudeau and the Liberals stay in power, and it doesn't even matter because it's the LibCon party, as Maxime says, they want to continue to increase the current carbon tax even up to 225% by the year 2030. So if we think we're paying a lot now, it's only going to continue to go upwards. And the People's Party of Canada is the only federal party that will stick by its word and scrap the federal carbon tax.
I think to put this in perspective for people, I was doing a little research for an article today on the Yellow Vest protest. And what kicked that off was obviously the tax increase on gasoline. And I was reading an article, and it was the person called himself an environmental militant, but he said, you know what? I understand gas is going to be phased out. I understand we need to get rid of it, but at some point, you know, I live 30 minutes from the train station and I need to drive to work and I can't afford to do this now. And he was out protesting with the Yellow Vest protest. So, I mean, we don't know anything about expensive gas yet. You ain't seen nothing yet, as the saying goes. In 2018 or 2019, when the Yellow Vest protest kicked off, the equivalent here for people to understand how expensive it was and is about $2.20 a liter Canadian. So this is obviously where we're heading with the carbon tax. It's set to, I believe it doubles year over year, but the implications of that, I don't think can be overstated. And I'll let you speak to that because, I mean, home heating on fixed income, that hits you hard. My car has gotten about $15, $20 more expensive to fill every week. And if I'm just commuting to work every week and I go through a tank, that's an extra $80 a month out of my pocket. So would you like to speak to that a little bit?
Well, anyone that's done their research into, I know that a lot of people within the PPC talk about the globalist agenda, specifically the United Nations and their sustainable development goals. So once you have a background understanding of what their end goal is and the means they're trying to use to achieve it, they are purposely trying to starve everyday Canadians from being able to even purchase a vehicle. I've seen even more ridiculous articles lately where they want to make the sale of gasoline-powered vehicles just totally take them off the market, I think by 2050.
2030, I think I've seen in California for the United States. So, yeah.
With that, so it's just like, this is utter lunacy. Like, it sounds all wonderful that we're going to have electric powered vehicles, but it's not realistic. We don't have the power infrastructure. If people all turn their air conditioners on in the summer, we're already facing blackouts. We're going to have to sink so much money into this make-believe fairy tale green energy, whatever you want to call it, deal, that it's just the ends is not worth the means. Like, it's just ridiculous. And as I said, their goals are to restrict people from being able to own private property. We've heard Klaus Schwab from the World Economic Forum talk about you'll own nothing and be happy. Private vehicle ownership is one of those things that they're going to try to take away from Canadians and the people around the world, and they expect us to be happy about it. So how are we going to get to work in our other places that we need to get to? Well, they're going to try to abolish private property next and usher us into their so-called smart cities and other things like that. So there's a real sinister agenda at play, and these are all just buzzwords that are part of this bigger agenda they have at play.
Well, to speak to this a little bit, like, I mean, people can get caught up in some of those buzzwords and discount everything you just said because they don't like the buzzwords. So let's round back a little bit. You hit on a couple of things. EV infrastructure, we're not really in a place to actually do that. If every person just today took their gas car, exchanged it for an EV, that doesn't work based on the current infrastructure that Canada has. So we'll talk about that. I'll let you talk about that a little bit. And the second part, when we expound and think logically about rising gas prices through the carbon tax, the hardest hit communities is rural communities where you need to travel into work, where you need to, you're always traveling. It's just the reality of rural life. I grew up in the countryside. I drove 45 minutes in to get groceries. We do that maybe once every 2-3 weeks. You live differently. But one of the things that will happen as a result, if you can't afford to drive in a rural community, you're going to be forced to move from the rural countryside into the urban concrete jungle, as I call it. So let's talk about those two things: EV infrastructure, where we're at with, is it even possible? And then just how that plays out, carbon tax on rural communities over time as it's exponential.
I've also read from Bill Gates, the world's most renowned scientists and doctors at this time. that we can put solar roofs on every roof in North America. We can have those huge, ridiculous wind turbines put up on basically every inch of property. And even that is not going to meet the current or future energy demands, especially to have everybody plugging in a Tesla vehicle at night. So he's even admitted that the means to be able to create enough energy to meet our future and current demands is it's going to have to be done through research and development. We don't have the means yet to be able to reach that. So like, I think we could be investing in as a country to be able to find more feasible alternatives to help meet our energy demands. But the things they're doing right now, they sound good on paper, but in reality, they just don't work. Like you can see the electric vehicle graveyards, they call them. These batteries are extremely horrible for the environment. You can't dispose of them or recycle them. They just sit there and just rot away, basically, or rust. So those things, they sound good on paper. In real life, not so much. Even the wind turbines, they're incredibly damaging to the environment, even just to manufacture. So, like, alternatives to meet those energy demands. And for now, as I said, our current energy sector, we have some of the most strictest policies and environmental standards. Like I totally support the people who are energy workers in this country.
You talk about the energy vehicle graveyards. I don't think people understand, you know, how much of a problem that is, and also just how much rare earth that an EV takes compared to a normal gas vehicle. And while I'm thinking of it, just because I like to show people this is one of the places where these kind of minerals come from. And so we talk about, you want to ramp up EV, let's have a talk. I always say cost benefit analysis, look at the whole picture from start to finish. And this is the result. You need these rare earth minerals. A lot of them are coming from China, and they're coming from places like this toxic lake in China, where they don't care. Rare earth discharge liquid flows from a pipeline into a rare earth lake near Jingguang village. So again, this is just one of those things that people don't talk about, but is a reality, I guess, of EV infrastructure, if that's the direction people want to go. So now we're going to get into a fun little conversation here. It's your topic of choice, and a very, very touchy one these days. So we're going to move into critical race theory, and prompt here with an article that you sent me. All right. Do you have a specific spot that you want read?
That one, I was just, what stuck out to me the most was the amount of federal funding that was going to be going into I call it desecrating these unmarked graves. There was a lot of hysteria that first came out from the CBC when they sounded the alarm back in Kamloops maybe a month or two ago now, stating that they found mass graves, basically. Now, on that statement a little bit, they've actually come out and said that some of the burial sites they were looking at were actually old community cemeteries that were not just privy to children that went into these residential schools. And the timing that the story all came out, I found it very interesting. We've seen Trudeau appointing Indigenous Governor General in Canada around the same time where we had our political establishment in our Senate pass for the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. So being in school right now, I go to McMaster University, and these are a lot of very talked about topics within the curriculum and within the school conversations. They continue to use these Marxist ideologies to segregate us and label us, whether it's on our race, our gender, things like that. And it just continues to boil over and continues to polarize our society more and more. Background or ethnicity, I identify as a Native American. I'm a proud Canadian. I'm very proud to live in a country like Canada where we take our rights and freedoms very seriously. We're lucky to be in one of the most free and prosperous countries in the world. I know some people might chuckle at me after saying that over the last year and a half, but that's the reality of it. We've been bastions of hope for struggling communities or countries around the world. We see nations that are under very authoritarian and totalitarian control, and unfortunately, we're starting to see even those types of the political rule permeate our own society right here in Canada. So while we're continuing to be pit against each other on these ridiculous notions, there's while we're distracted arguing with each other over things like race or gender, like I said, they're pushing forward their own further agendas, which are much more sinister. They're not putting our best interests at heart, and they're using the plight of people like Native people with UNDRIP to attack property rights in Canada. So there's so much to unfold within these things. Like I've seen people like Mark Friesen, PPC candidate out from Alberta. Him and Salim Mansour have like hour-long discussions on these topics. Like it's just there's so much you can learn from it and that you can unpack from there, like I said. And like I said, it's just ridiculous right now. Like people are even so afraid to even have the discussions like we're having right now about race and whatnot, because if you're going against the popular mob speech, so to speak, they'll label you a racist or white supremacist. Even being a Native American myself, I've been called a white nationalist or white Nazi more times than I can count. And I'm just like, what is going on with this? Like, if you have dissenting opinion, we have freedom of expression in Canada. We should be able to openly discuss these topics fairly and respectfully, and be able to have some really critical dialogue to help make sure that we're addressing these issues and solving them, and not just continuing to fight one another and be divided over them.
I think there's a lot to expound on here. So yeah, you talked about divide and conquer. I want to talk about that a little bit. And it's not that there isn't issues in our past that can be recognized. I think it's the issue is politicizing things for a purpose. And it is dividing society in a lot of ways. I mean, the graves weren't a new find. They weren't. It's not new knowledge. It's been known for a while. I don't know when the reconciliation report was written. I think it was 2015, if I'm correct. I'm not sure, but it's been out for a number of years. Trudeau knew about it, but now as we near an election, it's become a conversation piece again. I want to bring this up before we even go any further, because the same guy that is promising all these things and doing all these symbolic gestures, I'll just say they're symbolic, also did this when approached at a fundraiser about Grassy Narrows and the mercury poisoning there. So I'll just play this clip for everyone here.
Prime Minister Trudeau, people in Grassy Narrows are suffering from mercury poisoning. You committed to addressing this crisis.
Thank you for being here. Thank you very much for your donation tonight. I really appreciate it. And as we know, the Liberal Party is filled with different perspectives and different opinions, and we respect them all. And our commitment to
If it was your family that's been waiting for 500 days, if your family was suffering from mercury poisoning, what would you do? If it was your family, would you accept it? Would you accept 500 days for 1%? Mr. Trudeau, for 500 days, you have not kept the commitment. If it was your own family, what would you do?
Yeah, I'm just going to cut that short. I can't stand to listen to that man, but thank you for your donation. Thank you for your donation. They spent $200 to get in there to protest essentially a fundamental human right. So I'll just leave it at that. Access to water is a fundamental human right. Trudeau promised up and down he'd get it done. My understanding of a lot of the issues going around the water issue is that they need new pipeline and infrastructure in these communities that he has not provided. Put a nice shiny water station that cleans water and throw it through dirty pipes that are broken. It doesn't mean anything, but the whole conversation on critical race theory ties into all this, and it became a big political thing. And I think also I just wanted to add, Thomas Sowell, he talks about this in his book, Black Rednecks and White Liberals. But our perception here, and I want to get your take on this. This is a heavy question. You said you could ask anything. But our perception here on racism and colonization, different things, it's rooted in the belief that it's almost like a new idea, and it was unique to, I think, our ancestors. And I think my takeaway from his book was that humans are notoriously crappy across all generations and all ethnic groups. And slavery has been a history of every society, unfortunately. And it wasn't till recently that these things changed. My belief is that it was the Christian values and things that slowly tethered them away, the belief in a free and democratic society that slowly tethered us away from these old heinous traditions of slavery. But what is that's so loaded? But what's your take? Because I mean, for me, that all ties in the critical race theory, where people are, it's based on a false perception or understanding of history. My takeaway is that governments can manipulate people to believe that heinous things are okay. That's how I look at our history as a nation. Maybe that's not your takeaway, but I believe, it's the government that can usually, they act as that conductor through which people are convinced that things are okay. And I think looking at our history, we need to understand the full history to today and not just a portion that's being politicized for political gain.
Open-ended conversation right back at me there. But no, I totally agree with you on everything that you just mentioned there. Like Canada is a Christian country. It's founded on those Judeo-Christian values that you just mentioned. And we can go way back in history, even to my ancestors' philosophies and ways of being. And when you put the two side by side with Christianity per se, there are a lot of parallels and similarities there. Christians are very life stance and being against abortion. So are the traditional Native Americans in this country. You hear about that. And just even just tying it back into the People's Party of Canada's 4 founding principles, like individual freedom, personal responsibility, fairness and respect, those things go a long way. And those things were heavily incorporated into my people's traditions and history. And we see that also with Canada. They like to always focus on the negative, and they're distorting Native American culture and Canadian culture, as you said, with the very negative aspects of our history. They like to focus on the residential schools. They like to bring up things like not having access to clean drinking water and other things like that. And that's not our culture. Those are parts of history. Our culture goes back, I guess, to the beginning of creation, so to say, just like anyone else's in this world. And there were a lot of positives with that too. Even when they talk about colonization, there was a huge deal of mutual respect between early settlers and Native Americans on this continent. We intermarried with each other, so that obviously shows that there was a great deal of, as I said, mutual respect with one another to be able to do that, to be able to merge families and to listen to different stories, worldviews, languages, and stuff like that. And the other thing too, like we see, like the Hudson's Bay Company, one of the oldest corporations in Canada, on the mutual agreements and cooperation between those two very diverse, so to speak, to give birth to basically our modern economy. Like the fur trade was a huge catalyst for where we are today in terms of economics and trade. And merger of those cultures gave birth ultimately to what we see as Canada today. And I don't mean the radical left or radical progressives take on Canada, like the freedoms that we cherish and that we need to continue fighting for in this country. So like every race in every group, identifiable group of people throughout human history have been enslaved at one point or another. It was disgusting seeing people tearing down statues and whatnot. So now that they've done that a few times, so I'm assuming like there's no need to argue about it anymore. Everything's just magically fixed up and we can move on. So,
well, my issue with tearing them down of statues is it doesn't change history. It just allows someone to rewrite it.
Forgets its past, it's very easy to divert it and to pull it towards your own purposes, and those aren't working in our nation's interests.
I agree, and it's just to round this out, but like, how does this conversation need to be approached? I guess it's one thing to talk about some of the issues, but like, how do you actually approach this to educate people about the good, the bad, the ugly? I mean, we can't deny that I've read the reconciliation report. It was an ugly, ugly part of our history. The fact that Trudeau's father was in charge of that for a number of years, should, it's concerning. But how do you talk about that where it's a productive conversation and not one that's tearing at the fabric of society? Because I think that is the fundamental issue here with the idea of critical race theory is you can talk about the bad things without fundamentally clawing at the fabric of society and all the good that's in it. And I don't believe that critical race theory does that. And I also believe it's designed not to do that on purpose. But that's my take. And I'll let you close out this topic and we'll move on to lockdowns here.
Narrow in on it as best as I can. The political climate in Canada right now, they do everything they can do to take away any type of constructive conversation on these issues, and to make sure that it's like dividing society. You can't have an unpopular opinion that goes against the narrative in Canada, like I said, without automatically being deemed as a white supremacist or some other ridiculous term. We have these discussions in Canada, and it's our educational institutions or our government, they continue to themselves having this type of polarization. And if take the time to discuss these topics rationally and respectfully and be able to find a way to move forward, we'd be able to solve a lot more, and then they wouldn't be able to buy votes by making promises to have spend all kind of money to have clean drinking water on reserves or whatnot. They've been talking about these topics for decades now. It's time that we stop the BS and we actually start to have solutions and move forward. I'm not going to make a bunch of promises to throw money at things that are just going to be wasted or whatnot. Like, we need to actually find practical solutions that we can that are measurable and that we can make sure that we're achieving.
All right, I think that's a good place to move on into lockdowns. Here we go. Polling up Stats Canada. Here we are. So this is from a Stats Canada report. Provisional death counts and excess mortality, January 2020 to April 2021. And this represents 5,535 more deaths than expected were there no pandemic, after accounting for changes in the population such as aging. Over the same period, 1,380 deaths have been attributed to the same age group, those under the age of 65. Meaning if you're under the age of 65, 1,380 of you may have died from COVID. I say may have because if we know about the PCR test and the issues there, you have some questions. But it results from the pandemic itself, in the measures the government took, resulted in 5,535 deaths of the same age group. So that's just one small component, I guess, of lockdowns, but we'll use it as a launch point here. That's kind of one aspect of kind of the harm of lockdowns, but we'll let you expand on this and your thoughts.
Another really loaded topic here. We could talk about this for forever too. The healthcare standpoint has been just totally disastrous. Unlike Patty, I've actually worked in healthcare, and I have first aid and CPR training and stuff like that. So how we have a graphic designer in Canada that's leading this pandemic response, along with Theresa Tam, who's also has employment contracts with the World Health Organization. Like, it's a huge conflict of interest. The Conservatives, which are supposed to be the official political opposition to the Liberals, they've just completely played it to them, and they've continued to go along with these disastrous lockdowns. It's well known by many people. You don't need to be an expert in statistics to see the risk factor based on age. And because of these lockdowns, we've actually seen more deaths as a result of things like depression and suicide compared to actual COVID-19 deaths. And now, supposedly, I think they mentioned that we had over 81% of the population in Canada with at least one dose of experimental bioagent and at least 72% with both doses, why, if we have these measures and we have these lockdowns that are supposedly working to slow the curve that we've been working on for 2 weeks, it's been the longest 2 weeks in human history, why are we continuing to see increases of death this time around? And why are we continuing to look at more infringements on our rights and freedoms in Canada? I see Quebec's implementing a vaccination passport system. Like, these are huge, serious issues. And whether I'm not an anti-vaxxer by any means. Like, being in the healthcare industry, I've had more vaccinations than your average Joe. I do have serious concerns about these experimental bioagents that are being introduced for COVID-19, because there are no long-term human studies. These people are the studies. And even more egregiously, I seen a news article saying that Health Canada is trying to have participants participate in a study on mixing these experimental bioagents. And it's like, we're almost like, we're months into this now, and you've already been mixing these vaccinations with each other, bioagents. And now you want to do a study on it to find out the safety and efficacy of it. Like, it makes no sense at all.
Well, yeah, to expound on that, again, people might want to dismiss the information, but it is an interim approved vaccine. The lipid nanoparticles, you can look it up, that were the, I guess, silver bullet to be able to do the mRNA delivery, didn't come into existence till I think it was 2018 they started studying it. So people like to say, I've heard this argument again and again, well, we've been doing studies for a long time. It's not like it's a new thing. And then I always say, but did they get passed? That's first one. And the answer is no. And the second one is the lipid nanoparticle system at 2018 came into effect. But let's go down the business route here on lockdowns. Like you said, we could be on this topic forever. But again, I talked to Mr. Hillier about this. One business owner I interviewed runs a dog run. He's accumulated, the last time I talked to him, $150,000 in debt since the lockdowns occurred, and he's an essential business. That's the part I didn't say to Mr. Hillier. I forgot about. He was an essential business, but because of all the restrictions on travel, different things, his business took a huge hit. And I asked the question, if everything went to perfect tomorrow, everything opened up and you doubled your income, how long would it take? Like doubled your income before pre-pandemic level, how long would it take? And he said it would take years just to pay off the debt. So what's the PPC approach on lockdowns? How, this is the one that people are, I guess, would get upset with. Like, is the PPC government going to do nothing to protect the vulnerable? What happens if a PPC government takes charge in terms of lockdowns and restrictions to deal with COVID? Because there's a lot of opposition to anyone, as we see with Jason Kenney in Alberta, that has any ideas different other than the status quo of restrictions, masking, these type of things.
Theresa Tam has to be fired. From the People's Party of Canada perspective, as you've touched kind of on the economic impacts for these small businesses, these are extremely disastrous. And I've heard so many stories of people who have put their lives work into their businesses only to be going completely bankrupt now. They're having to pull out their pensions and all types of savings just to be able to stay afloat. And the government is giving them some type of COVID assistance as loans, or not loans, loans. And the thing with paying back a loan, you have to be able to make money to pay that back. And when we're seeing businesses being facing these increased restrictions and lockdowns and stuff, they're not able to make the money to pay that back. So it's not helping anyone at all. The People's Party of Canada, we respect the constitutional division of powers. Healthcare is a provincial jurisdiction matter. And with these provinces making these horrible decisions to lock down their citizens, we would definitely not be bailing out these provinces that continue to use these disastrous policies.
So that would be the conversation line there is, listen, you guys can continue these restrictions, but we're not going to be here to give you an unlimited amount of money to make up for the loss that you're creating as a result of those restrictions.
There's so many things that need to be addressed to be able to get these through. Like I said, it's healthcare is largely a provincial jurisdictional matter. We are able to do things at the federal level, basically cutting these where it hurts. And we also, as you've seen with how the current government has been going by Theresa Tam's apparent word on these matters, like we can try to implement measures to that's going to give credible health advice, that's not going to be running with these authorities somehow have. It's appalling to see how a health official in Canada has more political powers than our elected politicians. These people are not elected by the citizens. These people are not called to serve their citizens the same way our elected representatives are. So federal level to help intervene in these matters. I've known the PPC with in regard to the vaccination passports, we would be using any financial resources and any type of legal resources we could to prevent provinces from doing this, whether we have to have them tied up in the Supreme Court of Canada or whatever else we would have to do to stop these an infringement on our rights and freedoms in Canada.
And then we'll just close out on one more topic. There hasn't been a lot of any advice coming from the government on simple things that the average person can do short of getting a vaccine in their arm to improve health and improve chances for the virus. So my whole point on this is if we're going to focus on protection, and that's the reason we're doing all these things, we'll get your thoughts, but why not focus on things like body mass index, where we know that 70% of people in hospital are considered obese? Why aren't we focusing on vitamin D levels and things that are just easily obtainable? They're cheap, affordable for people. Why hasn't there been a focus on that in your mind? And would you put a focus on it if elected?
Don't make money. They're not very lucrative to big pharma. Pharmaceutical companies like Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, that to accumulate with these experimental bioagents being rolled out has been astronomical. Their margins are heavily increasing, while the country and around the world continued to be squandered from their wealth. It's globally, and as I said, it's not lucrative to have healthy people. This big pharma is dependent on people being sick. We definitely need, like when Patty Haidu said that vitamin D was fake news, like again, with having a health minister with no background in health or science or anything like that, making these types of calls for our country is extremely alarming. We need to have qualified professionals in these positions. And it's been really disgusting seeing doctors, nurses, and scientists continue to raise the alarm on these issues and say there's other alternatives that we could be using that are safer and more effective. We've seen a drug like hydroxychloroquine. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that on here. Over 60
censored.
over 60-year clinical trial data, and it's been approved for in third world countries. It's been fine for pregnant mothers and nursing mothers and stuff like that. And then as soon as it's being talked about in terms of helping lower the mortality rate with COVID-19, all of a sudden, oh, it's too risky. It's causing heart conditions and whatnot. But then we see these experimental bioagents. They're giving people young as 12 myocarditis. Like that, this is a huge health issue that is not worth having a cold for a couple of days, or at the very best, no taste or no smell. Like, why would you want to take that type of risk with your health? And
well,
like I said,
it's simple. The benefits outweigh the risk.
And when I worked at the Brantford General Hospital, I worked as a personal support worker on a stroke unit. So I've seen a lot. I've worked with and seen with a lot of patients who come in with cardiovascular disease, and a stroke or something like that is a huge life-changing condition, and it affects you for the rest of your life. I would rather be in bed sick for a week than being other for personal care for the rest of my life.
Okay, moving on here. There's actually a real good question in here from Tom. I've actually thought about this a lot. Your thoughts on having some form of legislation, recall legislation. Listen, Trudeau has probably had ample opportunities. We would say that if there was recall legislation, I bet you a number of people would have tried to get it going enough to have an election before it's going to be called. So what is your thoughts on, and obviously the PPC hasn't spoken on this, but your personal thoughts on a recall legislation, a mechanism for terrible governments to potentially be voted out early?
Mentioned the People's Party of Canada hasn't specifically addressed this issue yet. Personally, I'm a huge fan of it. I see how in the United States they've been able to utilize legislation like recall legislation and to be able to have citizens, politicians accountable outside of normal election periods. I think that's something that absolutely needs to be looked at in Canada. We see these lifelong politicians that just continue to toe the line with the political establishment. It's just absolutely egregious to see how they've turned their backs on the people that elected them into these offices and the people that they're elected to serve. So I would definitely be a supporter of that, and I would definitely look at implementing a measure like that.
All right, there you go, Tom. Right, last topic, environment, kind of ties into carbon taxes and things we've already touched on a little bit. But I have this article from Canadians from Affordable Energy. Great resource for anyone who needs to look into some energy-related things. Net Zero Part 4, IPCC experts say doing nothing would be less harmful than what we're doing right now. So I'll read the quote. In Kunin's words, this quote translates to a decrease. I got to go up a little bit for context. Sorry. But even as... No, we'll go there. Kunin notes that according to the IPCC, a temperature increase of 3 degrees centigrade by 2100, which some scientists say might happen, might create some negative environmental effects, which in turn would cause an estimated 3% hit to the economy. But even as it makes these claims, the IPCC further predicts that the economy in 2100 will be several times the size of the economy today, unless, of course, we interfere with it, as net zero by 2050 crowds want us to do. In other words, the strategy of doing nothing may or may not mean a temperature increase, the effects of which is bad, are expected to represent a small economic hit to the economy, but that economy will be much, much larger. In Kunin's words, quote, this translates to a decrease in the annual growth rate by an average of 3% divided by 80, or about 0.04% per year. The IPCC scenarios assume an average global annual growth rate of 2% through 2100. The climate impact would then be a 0.04% decrease in that 2% growth rate for a resulting growth rate of 1.96%. In other words, the UN report says the economic impact of human-induced climate change is negligible, at most a bump in the road. So carbon taxes are working. That's the takeaway, I guess, right? We need to tax things more. Just more money is always the solution. So take it away.
Absolutely. We might as well add 5 extra carbon taxes to the 2 carbon taxes Trudeau and O'Toole want to add to Canada. But in all seriousness, like where I'm from in Ontario, our weather changes 4 times a day, and the seasons change 4 times a year. Like the climate's going to continue to change as it always has. We've seen the planet go through ice ages, within time, and it's going to continue to do that. That's a part of Mother Nature, so to speak. We can continue to take practical solutions to protect our environment, to protect our water, protect the air we breathe, and that's not going to come through taxing carbon. It makes absolutely no sense. And of course, that report was from the United Nations, which is really hell-bent on using issues like clean or the weather, climate, whatever you want to call it, to be able to further their sustainable development goals, as I kind of touched on earlier in the interview. I'm not buying it. It's a lot of propaganda. As I said, the climate's going to continue to change. We need to learn how to adapt with it and live in harmony with it. If these things were such an issue, like I know a lot of people have mentioned how Bill Gates, again, he's buying oceanfront property. Well, if the water levels are going to raise because we're breathing too much carbon into the air, why are you making such a risky investment? Like it's what they preach. They don't believe their own propaganda they're pushing onto us mere peasants. So it's just, to be honest.
Yeah, cutting out a little bit at the end there, but to talk about that more, like, practical solutions to the environment. I mean, the carbon tax, like most money that Trudeau gets in this government, seems to be squandered. It doesn't go towards the things. You could make the argument, right? Like a carbon tax, if you just invested in R&D and it went to the perfect people, maybe it's an okay idea. But as we see usually is the case with governments, they're usually not efficient with funds. We talk about those practical solutions. What does that look like? How do we hold, for instance, major corporate interests with lobbies that get special perks and betties to be able to pollute a certain way versus other companies that can't do those things? So how do we deal with the real source of the problem, which is companies that don't follow the regulations, skirt the regulations, pour pollution into our waterways, things like that? How do we actually fix that versus, throwing a tax at something and saying like virtue signal, we did it kind of thing?
Extrapolate where the carbon tax dollars are going. I'm sure a lot of them have been funneled to the We Charity or funding feminist journalism in Africa. So being put to proper uses, like you said, it'd be different if these taxes were going towards research and development, but I can't believe that's the case in Canada. There's no evidence to back up that they're looking at ways to better protect our environment, our water, our air. And earlier too, we have a lot of environmental policies and restrictions in place, arguably have benefits too, and others are actually, I find, are impeding our businesses in Canada to be able to grow and succeed. We are one of the lowest emitters in the world, and yet we see, as you showed some of the images earlier of the wastelands in China and stuff, these people they're not having to go through the same standards we are. Their economy is not being squandered. Their people aren't being ridden with carbon taxes and whatnot. So it's just, I see this as a economical attack on Western society, specifically Canada and the United States of America. So if we're going to continue to be held to these high standards and do our part, then I want to see nations like China and other heavy polluters doing their part as well.
And I think that's only a fair conversation to have. There is a balance here, right? You can't do so much that you prohibit growth, but at the same time, that's where you would maybe advocate on a global scale to do these proper things. I'm not sure how you go about doing that, but I think it's important to Canadians. I think this is one thing, the Liberals actually do a good job playing to. I'm not saying they do a good job in the environmental, portfolio, but they do a good job playing to the fact that, Canada is known for being this beautiful, vast land that's full of beauty, and the environment, they hit on this hard. It deserves to be protected. And then they go, that's why we're carbon taxing you so hard. And they kind of play up to their policies. But I think it is important to so many Canadians to see that the environment's taken care of. But how do you strike that balance where, these are loaded questions again, because we're talking about generalities, but how do you strike the balance between business and environment in a way going forward that's healthy, not only for the growth of the country, but also keeps the environment healthy?
A lot of these people who do a good job at moving their lips and talking about protecting the environment, they're also continuing to allow us to pump raw sewage into our fresh waterways in Canada. So
thank you.
I don't know how you can come out and say that you want to protect the environment or whatnot and protect our water, and then you're doing backwards things like this when we need to be finding better solutions. Like I'm that's not my area of expertise. I'm not going to pretend to know that I know how to take raw sewage and turn it into something good. I don't know. I'm out in the country. People spray manure on fields. I don't know if we can do that, but we need to just continue making sure we're staying in some sort of balance, as you said, that's allowing for economic growth, but also making sure that our natural resources are sustained and that they're available for future generations. Like we need to, and like I said, I think a lot of these solutions to some of these issues might not be discovered yet. We need to continue. Well, this is the other thing too. Not every issue needs to be solved by the government. Like some of these things can be handled when the government steps back and allows these businesses or corporations, whatever, themselves to be able to create wealth for their employees and their business, and to be able to put the money themselves into helping us find some of these solutions. And when we're continuing to overtax businesses and stuff like that, we're really doing a disservice, because we're driving jobs out of Canada. They're not able to put money towards things like research and development, because they're putting all the money back into the federal government, which, as we can see, it's a bunch of real amateurs sitting in Ottawa that they don't have the answers either. They have to continue hiring different consultants and other firms and whatnot to try to give them solutions to these issues. And they just continue. It's just a vicious cycle of wasting money and not getting any action done.
I've never understood about the carbon taxes. Or this approach to climate change, I've never understood, because it's always based on disincentive. Other than maybe, you get 15 grand off an EV that the average person can't afford anyways. It's always a disincentive. And what I've never understood is, if this is such a pressing issue, where's all the creative solutions that make, harness, I say, the evil of human nature, greed. Everybody loves money. Why aren't we offering tax breaks maybe to reach certain developmental goals in certain industries, if that's what you say needs to be done to save the planet? I've never understood why we do all this disincentive, but there's never any talk about, hey, if you can develop, say, a more efficient development of energy by this much, we'll cut your taxes in half, or you don't. None of that's ever talked about. There's no incentive. It's always disincentive. What's your take on that? Because it bothers the heck out of me. If this is the pressing issue that is laid out to be catastrophic climate change, we're all going to die if we don't give our government the money, then why isn't there any talk about incentivizing good developments? Like, why aren't we harnessing the evil of human nature and the greed of human nature in a good way to save the planet?
Liberals and conservatives wouldn't have anything else to really run on if we allowed people to actually solve these issues. but you made a really excellent argument. Like, why aren't we entertaining things like that for these businesses and corporations to be able to solve these issues on their own, and to set targets and to demonstrate how they're able to environment, to lower their waste and stuff like that, like to raise productivity. Like, these are things that we need to allow businesses to be able to have the room to experiment around, so to say, without us being there saying a couple days ago we're going to increase carbon tax. Like,
well, it does save the planet. I think that's the good place to close on it. So, Mr.
It's been so cold.
So, Mr. Squire, where can people find you? I think you have a barbecue coming up that maybe would be a good place to plug. And where can people find you? If they have any questions for you, where can they reach you?
I have Maxime Bernier come to our barbecue, but I guess the vaccine passports were a little more salient in Quebec there, so we lost him to that, which I'll forgive him. We'll have him back in the area another time. People can reach me out on Facebook, Cole Squire PPC. I'm on Twitter, Squire for Brant. Email as well, colesquirepPC@gmail.com. We're working on getting our website up for our campaign, so we'll have that information posted shortly. And yeah, those are the main sources where you can be reached out and followed along for now.
And then closing elevator pitch here. Why should somebody who's on the fence vote for Cole Squire? Why should they vote for the PPC?
Every day that you get to fight against the corrupt political establishment that's hell-bent on global domination, and the People's Party of Canada and myself are the only ones that are stepping up to take on that battle and to take on this corrupt establishment in Ottawa. People want to talk about splitting the vote over and over. There's no vote to split. If you want, we've already talked about, if you want to go and vote Conservative because you don't like Trudeau, well, next year you'll just be sitting around twiddling your thumbs and pouting because you're still getting the same thing that we've gotten from the Liberal government. The PPC is putting Canada's first. We take a lot of these matters seriously, and we have the most common sense approach to a lot of the most salient political policies and issues that are facing Canada today.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us, Cole. I think that was a great conversation. Again, we've reached out to the other candidates in the area. I think it's more important now than ever to have an open, transparent, collegial conversation about topics that are hard to talk about. If you think these ideas are bad, I would add that the ideas don't go away just because you don't have debates with people. They just get stronger and usually more biased. So if you think I'm out to lunch as another candidate in Brantford-Brant, I encourage you to have a conversation about these same topics with me, and you can tell me exactly why I'm wrong. I would love to hear it. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Squire, the PPC candidate for Brantford-Brant. Thank you.